Copyright disclaimer. Under Title 17 U.S.C. Section 107, allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. Fair use is permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Nonprofit, educational, or personal use tips a balance in favor of fair use. Okay, guys, I'm going to read Chapter 2. Nay, nay, linoleum. My mom listened to rock music from the 1970s and 1980s. The King. She loved movies and television shows which we watched on hundreds of VHS tapes, recorded from television. She meticulously documented her movies with a computer-printed list that spanned 25 pages at its peak. The tapes were in huge bookshelves, multiple rows deep. She wasn't big on censorship when it came to movies, so I could watch anything she had. Stephen King's books and movies were a special part of our experience. Horror was my favorite genre of entertainment. I loved Creepshow, Pet Sematary, The Shining, but most of all, I loved It. Something captivated me about watching Tim Curry play Pennywise. The murderous embodiment of evil. I had a Creepshow comic book which I read repeatedly, Pet Sematary posters, and even cardboard cutouts from Blockbuster Video. My mother also read a lot of books. She consumed them as if they fed her hope for the future of another reality. Nonfiction was a scarcity. Scientology had already solved all those problems. Fiction was a world she lived in. I spent most of my time in my room alone or watching movies with my mother over a microwave dinner. Isn't that great? She occasionally cooked a large pot of spaghetti to be used as leftovers throughout the coming week. The best meal she cooked was in a crock pot, chicken and veggies, slow cooked in spaghetti sauce. For dessert, I froze a cup of apple juice with a spoon in it. The whole track. Isaac Asimov was one of my mom's favorite authors, and Robert Heinlein. Any space operas, big epic space stories were her top choice. Aliens, adventures, fantasy. Science fiction stories were true to her, as in actually true. Scientologists believe many authors of science fiction novels didn't imagine the stories, they remembered them. They are based in actual events. The author was involved with a long time ago in a galaxy far away. That's how she described science fiction to me. The author's memories are whole track recall. Scientologists believe our memories form a chain spanning many lifetimes back. You see, most people think these stories are totally made up, even the authors. But the truth is, these guys have a line to the whole track. They're recalling events that actually happened, she explained. It's whole track recall. I was amazed by how much my mother knew about the nature of the universe. She knew things that science hadn't caught up with yet. She understood the future and the present. She understood past lives. She even told me a story about the government hiding amazing technologies. I knew a guy some years ago who had high clearance in the government. He was a real straight shooter. He managed to get on lines, became a Scientologist, and one time I got talking to him. He said to me, "Julie, we have the technology right now to stand here on Earth, aim a rifle at the moon, and blow a hole the size of a dime right through it." My mom knew how to solve any problem from reading amazing tomes of wisdom, the books of Scientology. The words of Lafayette were our guides for every moral decision and every fork in the road. Everything revolved around his texts. Encyclopedias spanned our bookshelf, and through them we understood subjects like dinosaurs, countries, and history. For the deeper truths still unknown to the common person, an even larger set of books existed. Lafayette Hubbard's writings, Our group was enlightened. We were Scientologists, the only people on earth who could really help anyone. My mother guided me through passages I could manage to read. The text revealed mankind's motivation, which had been previously unknown to the world. I thought deeply about what I read and viewed the entire world as she intended me to. We believed in Scientology as much as we did in gravity or air. No more. The doctrines were perfect. They were absolutely true. Magic. A few times my mother alluded to having psychic powers and said she could communicate with our cats telepathically. We actually didn't view them as cats as much as beings that were controlling cat bodies. She could communicate with them, at will. Occasionally my mother walked into a room, got a very expressive look on her face, and made a sound like, "Woo, wow." That is it. I asked, fully focused on her. "There's a being, like right here," she said, pointing at some corner of the room. I looked at the corner but couldn't see anything, no matter how hard I tried. The first few times it happened, I didn't follow up with much inquiry, though. I was excited by the prospect that a real Thetan was with us. There was one time I asked questions, though. I had a brown stuffed lion I slept and played with. My mother came in my room one night and sat on my bed. She told me the lion had a Thetan in it, and she was communicating with it. I knew from previous experiences Thetans could read our minds. Our thoughts are mental image pictures that Thetans have access to. My mother was always teaching me about Thetans and how the world worked, but didn't spend much time on normal bonding activities. "What's his name? Where is he from?" "He says to tell you his name is Max because he liked that name in a book he read in his last life," she said. "Can he read my mind and tell you what I'm thinking?" "He says he'll try," she told me. I closed my eyes for a second, excited to participate. I thought of a pair of deep red cherries, bound at their tops with stem. It wasn't a real thought as much as an image in my mind. 2 cherries on a white background. I opened my eyes and said, "Okay, I've got one." My eyes were wide open as I looked at her. She thought deeply for a few seconds. "He says it's kind of weird because it's not a normal thought," she said. I felt the faintest hint of deflation before she finished her sentence. "But he says you're thinking of 2 round things," she finished. I looked over at my stuffed lion in awe. My eyes grew even wider as I inspected his plastic whiskers and well-sewn snout. His golden eyes were just as plastic as they always were, but I knew there was someone in there looking back at me. To this day, I have no explanation for that experience. I'm aware of the suggestive imagery magicians utilize to accomplish these kinds of tricks, but those who know my mother knew she was no magician. But why didn't she know Cujo was dying and in pain? Why did it take several days of him displaying obvious signs of distress before she noticed? These thoughts scratched at my mind. Other than the few times she claimed to communicate with our cats and rogue Thetans, telepathy was not a noteworthy subject in our lives. It was just another attribute of her. I was jealous she could communicate telepathically, and I couldn't. I knew Scientology was a way to get this telepathy, and I couldn't wait for it. But on the other hand, I felt like I had all the time in the world. I was young. Handlers. Because my mother had no husband or stable boyfriend, she enrolled me in several Scientology daycares. Oh, that should be great. Carolyn and Stan Miller's Scientology Daycare Center was my home while my mother was out at night. Stan's Daycare Center was in a dirty home in Los Angeles. They employed babysitters to watch several babies, toddlers, and small children. We slept on cots in the middle of a room while a television in the corner of the ceiling played the Smurfs and Disney classics. In a side room was a computer on which sitters played games like G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero. I got my first glance at a computer there, which fascinated me. It was like a calculator with games on it. One evening I was playing with blocks, wearing olive green pants. The odor coming from my diapers didn't attract any attention because the sitters were absent. When they finally did notice, they spanked me and stuffed me into an industrial sink. The woman in control showered me down like a nasty bucket. My crying only served to annoy her. Creating more drama than is appropriate for a situation is referred to as dramatization in Scientology. In times of grief or negative emotion, Scientologists are quick to dismiss emotions as dramatization. The scrubbing I received was the worst thing that had happened to me in my life. I hated the place. My mother often stayed out late, leaving me there long enough to remember and long for her. When she returned late at night, I shed tears of joy as she smiled and scooped me up. I knew this was my job as a man. I needed to get through it for her. What she was doing at night was making her happy. I needed to be brave for her. She called me Nay for short, and the rest of the family did too. My cousins called me Nay. When I was on my mom's good side, she called me Nay Linoleum. A name I never fully understood. I skipped preschool and my toddler years were spent in daycare centers. My mom was a provider and I was her strongman, ever trying to fulfill that role. There were no adult men in my life, just Mommy and Nene Linoleum. Though I didn't see it at the time, my life was already taking shape. Pumpkin. When I was 4, my mother enrolled me in Pumpkin School, an oddly named Scientology kindergarten, where I landed my first girlfriend. We held hands and she agreed to be mine. Though it only lasted a single day, I will always remember her name, Holly. It was also the place I had my first homosexual experience. I found Pumpkin School to be boring because I didn't get along with other kids. To me, it was just another daycare center. I hung out outside, digging with my hands to find enormous banana slugs, which looked exactly how they sound. I was fascinated by these creatures. I'd seen pictures of them in zoo books, magazines, but hadn't ever encountered them. Hollywood didn't offer me real-world living creature situations very often, so I valued the experience. I thought of the other kids as strangers and the teachers as the same mean people that had hurt me before. Still jaded from the incident at Stan's daycare, I was not yet ready to trust again. Not long after I arrived, another boy and I went into the bathroom together and exchanged pee kisses. I didn't think much of it other than as affection. I felt no attraction to him sexually that I recall. I didn't have any sexual urges at age 5. Does anyone? One of the teachers found out about the incident and they kicked me out of the school. I didn't get the opportunity to trust again and spent the remainder of the school year in daycare centers. For the first grade, my mother enrolled me at the Mace Kingsley Preparatory Academy, which was operated by notable Scientologists Debbie Mace and Carol Kingsley. The school had a reputation for being a great environment for Scientology kids to thrive in. MK Prep Academy showed me Scientology wasn't just receiving auditing to keep my mother happy, as it became part of my life outside of home too. I still had a strong urge to be normal, and the television told me what that was. I knew that normal kids didn't do Scientology auditing or go to Scientology schools. And while I felt there was a life outside of mine, I couldn't betray my mother by misbehaving or pushing back against participating in Scientology. She was everything to me and I loved her with all my heart. I had to stay the course even though I was still not ready to trust any outsiders. Once while playing during recess, I looked down at my feet to find a bee, apparently in trouble. He was spinning on the ground repeatedly, flailing his legs. I carefully picked up the bee in my hand and brought him closer to my face. As I looked down at him with compassion, I knew this being was in trouble. I could never let my cats at home suffer like this. I peered down at the helpless bee, continuing his dance of pain in the middle of my palm. I felt sad and wondered what I could do to help. I tried to communicate with him with my mind. I asked him with a thought, "What can I do?" I got no response. He continued spinning and I heard nothing new. I wished so hard that I could communicate with him somehow, like my mom could. Without any warning, the bee stung my palm. I dropped him to the ground and started to cry. A kid laughed at me while another spread the news about the sting. I felt betrayal immediately and deeply. Why did this being, a lovely, friendly bee who needed my help, attack me? We are here to help everyone, my mother and I. Why is this bee unable to understand me? How can I help save this world, if even a bee can't understand my intentions? Pickle. They kicked me out of the Mace Kingsley Preparatory Academy, this time for having poor grades and backflash. Scientology's word for backtalk. I didn't fit in there any better than at pumpkin school, and my grades were poor. I was getting C's and D's. I was already getting tired of the Scientology studies and found it difficult to trust. I just wasn't comfortable with strangers in authority positions. I only trusted my mom. Asking questions contrary to Lafayette's scripture brought punishment in the form of having to repeatedly read and reread the text. I memorized many Scientology idioms like, the only reason a person gives up a study or becomes confused or unable to learn is because he or she has gone past a word or symbol that wasn't understood. What if I just don't want to learn that subject? Vocalizing my thoughts only annoyed the teachers. My mother put me in the Cub Scouts for a few months to occupy my time while I wasn't in school. She told me they were people who believed in Christianity, a WOG religion. WOGs is a pejorative term meaning non-Scientologists, especially those who are too simple-minded to grasp Scientology. I enjoyed the Scouts because they took me camping and made learning fun. I wasn't accustomed to large groups and was already forming a personality as a loner. It didn't matter to me that they were Christians. It was nice to be in a productive group with high standards. I didn't make many friends there, but I did get some pins and badges for a few low-level accomplishments. I didn't stay long enough to build any trust relationships with the adults there either. When the new school year approached, my mom announced I was moving to New York to live with Sharon, Jake, and Juliet for a while. I spent most of the school year in Manhattan and New Jersey hanging out with my family. Arlene and Eliza visited from Florida, and since my grandfather was from New York, I saw some of my older Jewish relatives too. I enjoyed the experience of New York, though it was freezing cold the entire time. I marveled at pickle barrels, Hasidic Jews, and miniature tornadoes of trash. We gave names to frequently spotted homeless people, visited Niagara Falls, and went up over 100 floors of the World Trade Center. My mother had sent me there intending to fix my behavior, as I had been kicked out of the first two schools in my life. I viewed it more like a vacation, though, and enjoyed it immensely. I just wished my mother was there with me. When I returned to Hollywood, I asked my mom to put me back in the Cub Scouts, but she instead entered me into the Boys Club of Los Angeles, an urban youth center. The Boys Club wasn't a Scientology organization, and I did well there. I learned to play chess and ran with it. Some of the other boys were impressed at how quickly I picked it up, though I was only 7. I was the best chess player around. I was introverted but smart. I had no personal connections, so I expressed myself through problem solving. The facility was old and dirty, but I didn't mind. I was a scrappy kid with little interest in cleanliness. Outside at the basketball court, we discovered a wasp nest after some kids were stung. We came together to form the Bee Busters, a battering ram-wielding team of like-minded kids. Those bees got what was coming to them. By then I knew bees weren't my friends. They didn't want my help. We remorselessly crushed their nest to pieces. Darkness born. When the new school year came, I started 3rd grade at Cherimoya Elementary School in Hollywood. It was another mismatch. I was beaten up by a kid who didn't like me, and I didn't get along with the teacher. My grades remained C's and D's, and I was unhappy, as I failed to connect with anyone there. What I couldn't articulate then was that I was looking for a private, non-Scientology school with individual attention and team building. I wanted education in a safe and fun environment. I just wanted a normal life, the one I saw on television. Where can I make friends and have those experiences? As the auditing and public schooling pressed on, my patience wore thin, and my grades slipped into F's. I was failing at school, and I'd been supporting my mother for years by being a Scientologist. The internal stress mounted. She ignored my timid pleas for a better school, and she was unwilling to take me out of public school because she didn't want to pay for non-Scientology private schooling. I really didn't know what to do. A negative energy was building inside me. I felt alone and lost, and without real friends. Fancy vacation. I really liked baseball cards, though I didn't care for the sport itself. My grandfather took me to a Dodgers game one time, which sparked my interest. I studied baseball statistics and memorized the pictures of famous players at the time: Jose Canseco, Oriel Hershier, and Darryl Strawberry. I tracked batting averages and knew every top baseball card brand: Topps, Fleer, and Donruss. My mom never gave me an allowance, and she didn't believe in it. Scientologists believe giving freely to someone is detrimental because it makes them out-exchange, which causes them to commit sins. When I was 8, I skipped school and stole some baseball cards from a nearby collector's shop. I got caught stealing a few pieces of candy from a grocery store, too. I was crying out for help. To me, stealing wasn't a big deal. I placed no value in ownership because my mom taught me reality was a consideration of the mind. I knew objects had no thetans, and the bad things I did would be washed away. In Scientology sessions, anyway. I didn't have any money or a way to get any, so it all added up at the time. My mother wasn't happy about my out ethics. Scientology was supposed to discourage me from bad behavior. When Scientology doesn't work for someone, it's always the fault of the person. It's always because the person is out ethics. Always. She had to get my ethics in. A couple of months later, she introduced me to a new plan of hers. "Nay, there's this cool ranch I want you to go to," she said. "Ranch? What's a ranch?" I asked. "It's like a farm. There are horses and pigs and camping. It will be fun." She told me it was just outside of Los Angeles in Palmdale. She brought up how I enjoyed the camping at the Cub Scouts. She was selling me on going, but I was worried about not seeing her. She was my everything. "It's another Mace Kingsley place, you know, like the school in L.A., she added. I imagined going on camping trips and learning how to use a bow. I hesitated, though. I didn't want to leave my mom's side. Why is she okay with me leaving her? I felt guilty for being even a little interested in going. I didn't like public school, but I felt I could suffer through it to be by her side. I loved her. I didn't want to go to some fancy vacation ranch while she had to stay in L.A., working without me. I wasn't sure I deserved this gift anyway. I'd let my mom down by avoiding Scientology courses, ditching school, and stealing baseball cards. I wasn't a good Scientologist child. I was only 8, but I thought my mom needed me as much as I needed her. She insisted I go, and soon we headed out to the Mace Kingsley Ranch in nearby Palmdale.